Since it's been a couple of weeks since we were together, um, I'd like to kind of go back and talk a little bit about what we said about Habakkuk as we kind of just did the introduction. Um, so again, we don't know exactly when Habakkuk's ministry was. He doesn't mention anything about the northern kingdom. He doesn't mention anything about Assyria. So we can kind of assume it was after that. He does talk about Chaldeans, or more specifically, God was talking about the Chaldeans to him. So that appears to be before the first Babylonian invasion. Um, so we kind of estimate that he probably started his ministry during Josiah. Um, but again, that's an estimation. We don't really know. We don't really know much else about him. Uh, that's probably about all we really said 2 weeks ago. So what I want to do today is start out just kind of looking at we're going to do Habakkuk a little bit differently. Still trying to cover the same key things we cover. We've talked about the when and the where. He appears to be in Judah. It appears to be maybe in the time of Josiah or one of the kings immediately after Josiah. We don't know much about him. We don't know, what his vocation was, if he had a vocation besides being a prophet. Um, I want to kind of talk about the form of the book, because the form of the book is different, and I use the word unique all the time talking about the prophets. This is a unique form, right? If we look at the opening 4 verses, it says the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. So again, these are visions he's dealing with. Even when he says God said that to him in a vision. It's interesting that he doesn't say the vision, he says the burden. Okay. Um, verse 2 says, "O Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, and therefore perverse judgments proceed." We're going to dig into that later, but that's the opening paragraph. So who is talking there? Habakkuk. Okay. Now, if you look at the next verse 5 and verse 6, it says, "Look among the nations and watch, be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days, which you will not believe, even though it were told to you. For indeed, I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs." So who's talking there? God. So Habakkuk said something, God answers him. Okay. If you look down to verse 12, it says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have appointed them for judgment, O Rock. You have marked them for correction." Again, we're going to dig into that. But again, that's Habakkuk talking to God. And then in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, "Then the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it." Okay. That's the form of the first 2 chapters. It's a conversation. It's through visions, but it's a conversation between Habakkuk and God. Habakkuk says something, God answers him. And Habakkuk says something else, and God answers. Okay. So again, we're going to get into this in some more detail as we go along, but that's basically the form. The different part of the book is the third chapter. And the third chapter is very powerful, but it is basically just a prayer, Habakkuk praying to God. Okay. So we defined a prophet as somebody who speaks to the needs of the people that he's prophesying to. Usually he's talking to the king or is doing something for the king, make it like with Jonah, for instance. That whole story was a sign to the kings. This one's a little bit different. This is not really preaching to the king. It's not really addressing directly something that the people need to hear. So technically, it's not a prophecy. So we've seen a couple of books that had a lot of historical narrative in it. This is not even historical narrative, right? We're just eavesdropping on a conversation between a prophet and God. So again, this is a very unique book, just a conversation between Habakkuk and God. Where is he during this conversation? He tells us in chapter 2, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 1, rather. No, he's in Judah, apparently. He's on the rampart. He's alone on the rampart. Okay. A rampart is a wall, basically. Okay. So let's go back and look at chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Habakkuk says, this is, again, his first complaint. I guess that's a good way to put that. He says, "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry and you not hear?" Now, again, we know God hears. What he's saying is, you're not responding to me, basically. Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity, cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Okay. Habakkuk is saying, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I am praying. What are you doing? How come you're not dealing with this? I'm praying, you're not answering me. Okay. What do we call that? What would you put a word on what Habakkuk is suffering from, going through?
You mean besides whining?
Pardon me?
You mean besides whining?
Whining. He's a whiny. This is doubt. He's like, I don't know what's going on here, And doubt, if it's not dealt with, leads to unbelief. Okay. And that's something we all need to be aware of. We're going to talk more about doubt as we go on through here. Okay. So let's talk about the theme of Habakkuk real quick. Chapter 1, verse 5, look among the nations and watch, be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days, which you would not believe though it was told you. Chapter 2, verse 4 says, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. You heard that verse before? Maybe not that verse, but that sentiment. But the just shall live by faith. Okay. That's one of the greatest statements of faith we see in the Bible, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more later. But in 3 different chapters in the New Testament, that is repeated. It's repeated in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. It's repeated in Galatians 2, verse 20. And it's also in Hebrews 10, verse 38. The just shall live by faith. Habakkuk said the just shall live by his faith. Some translations say his faithfulness. Okay. Now, in chapter 3, again, that is that's a prayer Habakkuk is praying, obviously to God. But within that prayer is one of the greatest statements of faith in the Bible. Okay. The very tail end of chapter 3 in verses 17 through 19. It says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the field yields no food, though the flocks may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Right? So he just painted a very desolate scenario. But then he says, yet, or but, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He shall make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high hills to the chief musician with my stringed instruments. So he's praying to God, but he's saying, look, even though all this stuff falls apart, there's no food, there's nothing to eat, I'm going to rejoice because you are my salvation. Okay. And that's a really powerful expression. And I think, again, it's probably one of the greatest statements of faith you'll find in the entire Bible. The theme basically is I believe God. I believe in God and I believe God. Now, the plan of Habakkuk, I kind of talked about this a few minutes ago, right? Chapters 1 and 2 are him whining at God and God answering him. And then in chapter 3, we have this prayer. Okay. So Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1 says the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. Okay. So the burden that he's talking to God about goes through chapter 1 and through chapter 2. We have an unfortunate chapter break in Habakkuk. Chapter 2, verse 1 really is part of chapter 1. Okay. Chapter 2, verse 1 says, and I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me, and I will answer, and what I will answer when I am corrected. Okay. So if you look at the tail end of chapter 1, we'll dig into this again later, but chapter 1 is this constant back and forth. The end of chapter 1 is another one of his complaints to God. But he wraps it up by saying, okay, now I've said that, I'm going to stand here and watch for your answer. And I know I'm going to be corrected. I know you're going to straighten me out. Okay. So in chapter 2, verse 2, then you see the Lord's response. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on the tablets, that he may run who reads it. So there's no real break logically between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's just a continuation of this back and forth between him and God. There's a break between chapters 2 and chapter 3. Because in chapter 3, we have this prayer of Habakkuk that ends with that statement of faith we just read. Okay. So chapter 3, verse 1 says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. I had to go find out what that was. Is he standing on something called Shigionoth?
I just looked it up. It's a musical term. It's like all big emotion.
The root word literally means to err, to be wrong. But it's used in the sense of reeling to and fro. Okay. And it's applied to giddiness. It's applied to intoxication. It's applied to love. Okay. Isaiah uses it in chapter 28, verse 7. Yeah. It says this, but they also have erred through wine. That erred through wine, that's that word. And through intoxicating drink are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through intoxicating drink. Same thing. They are swallowed up by wine. They are out of the way through intoxicating drink. Same thing. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. That word's used twice there. Okay. It's in Proverbs 20, verse 1. It says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray is not wise. Led astray is that same word. And in Proverbs 5:20, it says, why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman? Enraptured is that same word. Okay. So it is a musical term, and it again, I just gave you the roots of all that, but the reason they use it in the sense is like when you're dancing and you're kind of reeling around like that. Not that any of us as Baptists would ever do that, but you know, in the context of music, it is like a reeling song, like I was just talking about, where you're kind of dancing around. But what it implies is it is a song that is delivered in the greatest excitement. So it's not, somebody sitting there playing an oboe, thing. No offense to oboe players, but it's an exciting type of song. So when he says a prayer on Shigionoth, he's basically saying, I'm excited about this, right? Just like we're having a dance or something. I'm excited about praying to God. Okay? Go back to chapter 1. Take another look. We're going to look at a little bit more detail here. So Habakkuk is asking God a question. He has doubts. And you know what? That's okay. If you never have any doubt, you don't need faith, right? Faith is what helps you get through the doubts. And again, chapter 1, verses 2, 3, and 4. O Lord, how long shall I cry and you not hear? Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore, the law is powerless and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, perverse judgment proceeds. And the Lord answers him. And I think because the Lord answered him, and because Habakkuk accepted that answer, then Habakkuk's got another question. He's got another doubt. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. And you'd have to go back and look at God's answer for that to make sense. And we'll talk about that. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. Who's the them? He's talking about the Chaldeans. You have appointed them to execute your judgment. Not, when I read that at first, I thought he was talking about judgment. He's appointed the Jews for judgment to come to them. But it seems really he's talking about the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. You have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devour? When the wicked devour a person more righteous than he. Why do you make men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net. They gather them in their dragnet. Therefore, they rejoice and are glad. Therefore, they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to the dragnet, because by them their share is stupendous. Sumptuous. And their food plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? We're going to look at that in some detail also, but basically Habakkuk saying, God, how can you use the Chaldeans? How can you do that? And again, we're not going to deal with the answer right now, but God answers him. And again, Habakkuk shows that it's okay to take your questions and your doubts to God. You think he doesn't already know you have those doubts and questions? Okay. It's fine to take them to God. Without the doubts and the answers that went back and forth in chapters 1 and 2, we wouldn't have that great prayer of faith we see in chapter 3. So let's look a little bit at his question in chapter 1. First question. He says, "How long shall I cry?" He's not talking about weeping. He's talking about crying for help, calling for help, and you not hear. Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to stumble, to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore, the law is powerless. That word really is ignored. Okay. So it's not like the law doesn't have power in it, but the people who are supposed to be executing the law aren't doing that. So the law becomes ignored. Justice, therefore, never goes forth, and the wicked surround the righteous. Okay. So Habakkuk is saying, all these people are doing bad stuff and nothing's happening. You ever thought that? I've thought that. God answers him starting in verse 5. He says, "Look among the nations and watch and be utterly astounded. For I will work a work in your days." That word will really is not there. It's implied. The translators put that in. God says, "I work a work in your days." When you put the word will in there, it sounds like it's going to happen, but without the will, God says, "I've already started doing this." Okay. Which you would not believe though you were told about it. For I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwellings that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity. I had to stop and look that up. That made no sense to me either. The word dignity, some translations say exaltation. Some say majesty, some say glory, some say authority. Literally, the word is exaltation or could be excellency. It proceeds from themselves. So they're exalting themselves, but that reputation precedes them. Everybody is terrified of the Chaldeans. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sands. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, and they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. In other words, when they lay siege to a town with walls, they build earthen ramps. Then his mind changes and he transgresses and he commits offenses, ascribing this power to his God. So the Lord is saying, I'm using them, and this is why, but they transgress, not because of what they're doing, but because they are attributing their success to false gods. Okay. And then Habakkuk asks the second question. He says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die." So that's interesting because he's saying, I'm bringing the Chaldeans in and they're like a zombie horde, you know. And then Habakkuk's response to that is, "We shall not die. You have appointed them being the Babylonians and the Chaldeans, for judgment." Okay, again, you're using them for judgment. You have marked them for correction. You're using them for correction. Then he goes on to say, you are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. That's a misquoted verse. People say God can't behold evil or wickedness. Well, that doesn't make any sense because he has Satan up there talking to him in heaven. We know from the scripture. What it's saying is he can't look on wickedness with favor. He cannot in a positive way look at wickedness or evil. And Habakkuk goes on to say, but why do you look at those who do treacherously? Why do you hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? And they take all of them up with a hook, and they catch them in their net, they gather them in their dragnet, and therefore they rejoice and are glad. And then Habakkuk goes on to say, they sacrifice to their net, and they burn incense to the dragnet, because by them, right, we already read through all that. They are attributing their success to their false gods. Okay. Therefore, they empty their net and continuously nations without pity. And then you get into chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he, God, will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. So again, he's got no doubt that God is going to correct him on this. But the question he's putting before God, I think, is the same question a lot of us have. How can God use a wicked nation like the Chaldeans and the Babylonians to accomplish his will? Right? But he does that. He used the Syrians, he used the Assyrians, right? He used the Babylonians, he used the Persians, right? The Persians were the ones who sent the Jews back home, right? But the Persians were a warrior nation. They conquered Babylon. These people we're talking about here, the Chaldeans, the Medes and the Persians conquered the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. They also conquered Egypt, right? So, sometimes you look at what's going on in the world and you think, how is God, why and how is God using this evil person or this evil group of people to accomplish his will? Okay. Habakkuk asked that question. Right? And then starting in chapter 2, verse 2, God answers it. And this is almost like in some respects, almost kind of like a sermon. He's got like 3 points to this. It says, then the Lord answered me and said, point number 1, write this down and make it plain, right? Write it down and plainly that he may run who reads it. I'm not 100% sure what he means by that, but maybe the person that reads it scares them so badly they're going to want to run away. I don't know. Point 2, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Again, literally it means fail. I have set a plan in motion. It is for a particular appointed time and it will not fail to happen. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. It is tarrying, but it won't tarry forever. It's coming. Okay? And then the third point is, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith or by his faithfulness. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. Again, speaking of the Chaldeans. Okay. So he's using the Chaldeans, he's using the Babylonians to accomplish his will. All of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2 is this back and forth between Habakkuk and God. And I think the thing for us to realize today is simply that Habakkuk shows us, again, this guy's a prophet. God is speaking to him directly in visions, but Habakkuk has doubts. He doesn't understand what God's doing. He can't understand why God's not doing something, basically, because he's saying we got all this evil going around and nobody's, applying the law, and all the bad people are winning. They've got the big barns and, the big herds, and those of us who are trying to follow your word are being trampled over, you know. So again, it's not like God doesn't know Habakkuk has those questions. I We had an EE team go talk to a couple one time at our old church, and in EE we like to ask, we call them two diagnostic questions, and basically one of them, the first one is, have you come to a place of spiritual life you know for certain when you die you're going to go to heaven? And then secondly, we'll say, so if you were to die today and you stood before God, he said to you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say to it? And we had this older couple that really got mad at that question, you know. And I wasn't there, but the team came back and was telling me about it. And that couple then came to join the church. And the team leader came over to me as they were talking to the pastor, kind of saddled up to me and said, that's the couple I was talking about. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take him, you know. So we went in the back and asked him two questions. He got very indignant with me. And he said, God would never ask a question like that. I said, why not? He said, because he already knows the answer. And I said, so you're saying God never asks questions he knows the answer to? And he says, no. I said, did he not know where Adam was in the Garden of Eden? And it just stopped him cold at that point. And I said, God doesn't ask questions because he doesn't know the answer. He asks questions because he's almost sure you know the answer. He wanted Adam and Eve to realize, oh, we're hiding from God. You know. So if you go back, every time you go back and read, anytime God asked a question, it wasn't because he didn't know the answer. He was trying to make a point with whoever was talking to. What's your name? My name is Jacob. Jacob means deceiver. So again, God's bringing that to the front, and then he changes his name. He says, "You're not going to be a deceiver anymore. You're going to be Israel. You're going to be mine." You know, over and over and over. When God asks questions, it's not for his benefit; it's for our benefit. This is the same type of thing. It's not like he doesn't know we have questions and doubts, and questions and doubts are fine if you handle them right. The way you handle them is you take them to God. Now, God may answer your question through somebody, a person who can give you some spiritual advice. But if you have doubts, you've got to deal with them, because like I said when we first started talking, doubts that are unresolved lead to unbelief. And we've seen this in our family. If somebody started having doubts and the doubts weren't resolved, and it led to unbelief and kind of walking away from God. It's painful when that isn't handled properly and the doubts are not dealt with as they should have been. But those doubts were very similar to what Habakkuk was having. Why is God letting this happen? And you guys have heard that, like if he's all powerful and all good, if he's all powerful, he's not all good because he let this happen. And if he's all good, he's not all powerful because he let this happen. Because we don't understand what God's doing. You could, in Habakkuk's place, he's looking at this and he's being told that Chaldeans are going to come in and just clean house. Like that isn't like something a loving God would do, right? And so Habakkuk he's not initially not talking about the Chaldeans, he's just talking about the other Hebrews for treating each other badly. Why are you letting them do this? A loving, all-powerful God wouldn't let people do this to other people. Yes, he would. All right. He's not doing it to them. But he's letting them exercise their free will and their sin nature. And then the punishment's coming. The Chaldeans were the correction to all this, right? And Habakkuk doesn't really address one of the root problems that the Hebrews had, which was false worship. They worshiped the right God the wrong way, and then they started worshiping the wrong gods. That was really one of the root problems that they had, because now they're not paying attention to what God thinks or what God's law says, because they're not worshiping him. When the Babylonians and Chaldeans came in, we talked about this in Isaiah and in Daniel both, that coming out of the Babylonian exile period, the captivity period, once the Persians sent them back home, after they came home, they still sinned. They still, like, they married the local people and all that kind of stuff we're supposed to be doing, but there was never a record of any false god worship going on. He broke them of that during the captivity. And again, that's why the writings of Isaiah, why there had to be just one Isaiah, and the writings of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, all of those things all pointed out to the Hebrews that this is happening because you are worshiping false gods and are not following my law. And not following my law was an outgrowth of false worship. Okay. You cannot worship God fully and not do what he says to do. You cannot say to God, you are the sovereign God of the world, but I'm not going to do that. That's saying you're not the sovereign, because if you were the sovereign, I'd have to do what you're telling me to do. That's what the Hebrews were doing, basically, is they were not following his law. They were doing what they wanted to do. They were worshiping false gods, which is the absolute slap in the face, to God. Not only am I not going to acknowledge you being God, but I'm going to make up some other gods over here. And that had been a problem for the Jews since they came out of Egypt, right? They were not on the road long before they made a calf. Aaron made a calf, and Aaron studied at the school of Adam and Eve. It's like, the people made me do. They gave me all this gold, and I threw it in the fire, and this is what came out. Like Aaron wouldn't take responsibility for that at all. Much like Adam's like, well, two things, God. She did it, and you gave her to me. And of course, Eve just had the snake to blame. And the snake's looking around for somebody to blame. So, but that's been there. That was a chronic problem with the Hebrews, with the Israelites, from the time they left Egypt all the way up until the Babylonian captivity, constantly falling away, constantly doing their own thing. The whole book of Judges about that. You read through Chronicles and Samuel and all those, and it was the same thing over and over and over again. They would do their own thing. God would send retribution their way, chastisement their way. They'd straighten up for a while. And in Judges, they would straighten up while that judge was alive, and then they fall back to what they were doing. Right? It just was over and over and over again. But it all roots from not really letting God be the Lord of your life and not doing what he says to do. So next week, we're going to look at chapter 3 of Habakkuk, and which is the prayer. Right. So we'll wrap up with that next week. Anybody have any questions out of all that? Okay.